Boker Tov, having now discussed the principles of Haggadah, let's turn our attention to some practical appliances and how to kasher them. I'll be referring to the principles that we've been learning over the past few days. And so if you don't understand any of the principles, feel free to refer back to them. So let's start with countertops and sinks. So if one wants to use one's countertop, which he uses throughout the year for Pesach, now let's think about it, if and how this needs to be kashered. So generally speaking, how does one use the countertop in the kitchen? Generally, it's with cold food. But sometimes, of course, hot food spills onto them from a clear rishon, from a pot which was on the fire. And so therefore, that needs to be kashered by pouring hot water onto it. Now, if we think about it, really, based on the principle we learned last time, that you go according to the majority of the usage of something, if one can be absolutely confident that, generally speaking, the countertops are always used for cold food, and it's rare that hot food spills onto the countertop, really one could be lenient and not kasher it at all, according to Sfaradim at least. However, the minhag is that we do purge it, we do pour hot water onto it. But you think about it, one could argue that one needs to do a full hagalat kalim, not just pouring onto it, but actually having to immerse the countertop in water. Why? Because there are situations where actually, uh, for example, let's say a person puts something with a pot which has sauce overflowing from it, a pot which was just on the fire and it's overflowing with sauce, and you put it on the countertop, and then that, if you think about it, that's a kli rishon. That countertop is absorbing heat from a kli rishon, and that would need to be kashered by immersing the utensil into it. But since this is rare, and there is no option really of kashering it by putting it into hot water, here even the Ashkenazim rely on the fact that you pour it on and you pour hot water onto it. But this underscores the point which we discussed last week, that the concept of majority use is a mahloket, and the Shulchan Aruch is lenient, and even the Rama holds that, for the Ashkenazim, holds that Meikar Hadim, strictly speaking, one can rely on this principle. In the first instance, the Ashkenazim kasher as much as the intense heat as possible for each scenario. But here, since there isn't really an alternative, it's become accepted practice for Ashkenazim to rely on the pouring of the hot water, of doing irui kli rishon onto it, as opposed to having to actually not use the countertop. This is why many of the Ashkenazim will also cover their countertops as well as kashering it. This is based on what we've just explained. Since one could argue that for the Ashkenazim, one has to do a more intense kind of kashering, which isn't possible for a countertop. Therefore, they cover it as well. But for Sfaradim, as we have explained, it's entirely sufficient just to pour hot water on it. Or if one doesn't want to do that, one's concerned about the material of the countertop, doesn't want to do that, then one can just cover it up and cover it with a thick piece of foil, and that would suffice in order to kasher it. Now, when pouring hot water onto the countertop and doing the process of kashering through irui, through pouring onto it, one needs to ensure that the countertop is both dry and also clean. And normally what happens is, if you think about it, we have a kettle, and you pour hot water from the kettle, and that you pour onto the places which you pour onto become kosher, but you normally can't kosher the whole countertop in one go. And so generally you do 2-3 attempts, depending on how big the countertop is. Well, one needs to be really careful about when relying on koshering through pouring is that the places which you've poured onto become kosher, but then the rest of the places where you haven't poured onto, where hot water has trickled onto those places, need to be dried before doing the second irui, the second pouring, and so on and so forth. And this is an important point which is sometimes overlooked, recognizing that it needs to be dry when pouring onto it. Sinks have the same principle as we've explained. And again, one dries it, and one works their way either from top to bottom, bottom to top. Probably easier to start from the bottom, so you pour onto the bottom of the basin of the sink in circular fashion. So you try to, in one go, try to get the whole basin, and then you don't have to dry that, because now you're going to be working on the walls. And again, you pour onto the walls, ensuring that each place where you're pouring on is dry at the moment that you are pouring onto it. And here, of course, it works to do irui, because here the only way hametz would have been absorbed would be through hot water coming from the tap, normally the vast majority of scenarios, and therefore that's why it suffices. So this is the method of kashering countertops and sinks, and tomorrow we'll talk about ovens, etc.